The concrete was cold. Jeff Ryder, Heinrich Severloh, ran his palm along the firing slit one more time. Smooth, perfect. A window carved into fortress stone, aimed straight at the sea. It was 15 minutes past midnight. June 6, 1940-4. He couldn't see the water, not yet. Just the endless black, where the English Channel breathed in darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the gun sight, beyond the mines and the wire and the iron teeth they'd planted in the sand, the enemy waited, or so they'd been told. Severloh reached into his tunic pocket. His fingers found the letter. He didn't need to unfold it. He'd read it so many times the words had burned into memory. I'll wait for you, Heinrich, until the war ends, until you come home victorious. She believed him. Hell, he believed himself. 3 days ago, he'd written her back. Confident words, strong words. When the invasion comes, if it comes, this beach will be their graveyard. We'll throw them back into the sea before lunch. Field Marshal Rommel himself had stood right here. The Desert Fox, the legend. He'd peered through this same gun slit, studied the overlapping fields of fire, traced the kill zones with his finger. Then he'd nodded, satisfied, certain. When they come, Rommel had said, his voice calm as stone, this beach will be their cemetery. Severloh pulled his hands back from the MG-42. The machine gun gleamed in the dim bunker light. Freshly cleaned, oiled, ready, 1,200 rounds per minute. When he squeezed the trigger, 1,200 reasons the Allies would drown in their own blood before they reached the seawall. He exhaled slowly. The night was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat in 12 hours. This same young man, this confident, letter-writing soldier with a girl waiting back home, would be found weeping, uncontrollably, surrounded by a mountain of spent brass casings, 13,500 of them. His gun barrel twisted from heat, his hands shaking, his mind shattered. He would watch an invasion force so vast, so impossibly enormous, that his brain would simply refuse to accept what his eyes were seeing. He would later claim, desperate to make sense of the nightmare, that he'd killed 1,000 men, maybe 2,000. Historians would shake their heads at the number. Impossible, they'd say. The entire American death toll at Omaha was 2,400. But in that moment, in the silence before dawn, Heinrich Severloh didn't know any of this yet. He just knew the concrete was cold, and the sea was dark, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the world was about to change. They called it the Atlantic Wall. 20-400 miles of fortress, snaking from the frozen cliffs of Norway all the way down to the Spanish border. Hitler himself had proclaimed it the most impregnable defensive line ever constructed. Propaganda posters showed it as an iron curtain, unbreakable, eternal, destined to hold back the Allied tide until the Reich's enemies bled themselves white and sued for peace. The numbers seemed to justify the confidence. 50-8 divisions, 17 million cubic meters of concrete, 1.2 million tons of steel, enough material to build a fortress that would last 1,000 years. Along the Normandy coast alone, the preparations bordered on obsession. 8 reinforced bunkers, 35 for artillery and 18 anti-tank positions, 45 rocket launcher sites, 85 machine gun nests, 6 mortar pits, every inch of beach mapped, every angle calculated, every field of fire measured to the meter. But it was what lay in the surf that truly revealed the depth of German preparation. 30-700 obstacles, planted in the tidal zone like a forest of iron teeth, Belgian gates, massive steel frames designed to rip the hulls from landing craft, Czech hedgehogs welded rail spikes that could gut a tank, wooden stakes driven deep into the sand, many topped with teller mines that would vaporize anything that touched them. Behind the beaches, another nightmare waited. 6.5 million mines, buried, hidden, waiting for the first footstep, the first tire. The first mistake. Rommel had wanted $60 million. Colonel Ernst Goth, a careful, methodical officer commanding the 916th Grenadier Regiment, had done the mathematics. His 4 artillery batteries could theoretically pump 120 rounds per minute into the killing zones. Combined with the other batteries along the coast, they could concentrate firepower so devastating that any landing attempt would simply vaporize under the weight of high explosive. On paper, it was perfect. The plan assumed only one thing: unlimited ammunition. That assumption, like so many others, was about to prove catastrophically wrong. June 5th brought weather that seemed sent by Providence itself. Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stipe, working from his Paris headquarters, analyzing data from U-boats and coastal stations, declared invasion conditions impossible. The wind howled at 22-25 knots. 6-foot waves hammered the coast. Cloud cover hung at 500 feet, thick and gray and impenetrable. Stipe assured high command the weather would hold. 2 weeks, minimum. No invasion force could possibly launch into this storm. Based on that forecast, the German command structure relaxed. Senior officers left their posts. Rommel himself departed for Germany on June 5th, a quick trip home to celebrate his wife's birthday. He'd even stopped in Paris to buy her a gift: gray suede shoes. He was carrying them in a box when he boarded the staff car. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding 7th Army, ordered his division commanders to attend war games at Rennes, training exercises, professional development. There was time. Even the naval patrols, the E-boats that normally prowled the channel at night, stayed in port. Too rough, too dangerous, the sea itself seemed to be defending the Atlantic Wall. What none of them knew, what their meteorologists couldn't possibly detect, was that the Allies had eyes the Germans didn't. Whether stations in Greenland, whether flights over the Atlantic, data streaming back to Group Captain James Stagg, who stared at pressure charts and wind patterns and saw something steep had missed. A window. 30-6 hours, maybe less. A brief break in the storm. Narrow, risky, but enough. Eisenhower seized it. 23:15 hours. June 5th, the radar operators noticed it first. Freya and Würzburg, stations along the Norman coast, picked up massive aerial formations. Approaching from the north, huge blips on the screens. Dozens of them, then hundreds. The operators weren't particularly alarmed. They'd seen this before. Allied deception raids, designed to keep German forces on edge. Planes dropping chaff, strips of aluminum foil that lit up radar screens like Christmas trees. A few bombers, maybe some path. Nothing serious. By midnight, the reports started flooding in. Paratroopers, Fallschirmjäger, full companies of them, landing across Normandy. But the reports made no sense. Some units claimed paratroopers to the east, others to the west. Some swore they were British. Others insisted American. What the Germans couldn't know, was that many of those paratroopers were dummies. Part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, rubber mannequins with firecrackers attached, dropped by the hundreds to create chaos. And it worked. Major Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, was one of the first to understand. He was awakened by frantic reports. Paratroopers landing near his positions. Real ones, American, British. He could hear the distant sound of firefights erupting in the darkness. Von Luck immediately requested permission to attack. The response from division headquarters came back cold and bureaucratic. Do not move until the situation clarifies. Years later, writing his memoir, von Luck would describe that moment with bitter clarity. I knew at that moment we were lost. The paratroopers were clearly marking flanks for a landing. Every minute we waited gave them time to consolidate positions. Yet we sat paralyzed by our own command structure, waiting for permission that came too late. 05:30 hours. June 6th. The first gray light of dawn began creeping across the channel. German observers in forward positions, cold, tired men who'd spent the night on high alert, began seeing something that no amount of training had prepared them for. In his bunker at strongpoint WN62, pressed his face against the gun slit. What he saw made his breath catch. Ships. Not dozens, not hundreds. Thousands. From horizon to horizon, the channel was covered. A gray carpet of steel, massive battleships, destroyers, cruisers, landing craft of every size and description, transport vessels, supply ships, an armada so vast it seemed to cover the entire ocean. 60-939 vessels. 1,230 Norships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 support vessels, 864 merchant ships. The largest naval force ever assembled in human history. Two men like Severloh, raised on propaganda about Allied weakness and disorganization, told again and again that the democracies were too divided to mount a serious threat. The sight was psychologically devastating. Bernhard, an artillery officer at WN62, stared at the armada and reportedly turned to his men with a voice that had gone hollow. We're witnessing the whole world, he said. Arriving on our doorstep, he would be dead before sunset. 0-5-30-5 hours. The naval bombardment began. Nothing in the German defenders' experience, not the Eastern Front, not the heaviest RAF raids, not the worst artillery barrages they'd ever endured, prepared them for what followed. The USS Texas alone, one battleship, fired 255 14-inch shells at PW Du Hoc in 34 minutes. Each shell weighed as much as a car. Each impact shook the earth like a small earthquake. HMS Warspite, the first ship to open fire, around 0500 hours, would deliver over 315-inch shells in the first 2 days. The cumulative bombardment from the entire naval force was something the Wehrmacht had never encountered. Inside the concrete bunkers, fortifications designed to withstand anything the world came. Apart, shells slammed into reinforced walls and cracked them like eggshells. Men were buried alive, dug out by their comrades, then buried again as the next salvo arrived. The noise was beyond deafening, a continuous, thunderous roar that made thought impossible. Soldiers bled from their ears. Some went mad. The psychological damage was worse than the physical. These fortifications, the ones they'd been told were impregnable, the ones Rommel himself had inspected and approved, were crumbling, disintegrating, shattering under the weight of firepower that seemed limitless. If the bunkers couldn't save them, what could? As the naval guns roared, the Luftwaffe attempted to respond. Oberleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, received orders to attack the invasion fleet with his entire force. His response, recorded in the Squadron War Diary, was almost darkly comic. What entire force? I have 2 planes. 2. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies. The force that had promised air superiority over any invasion could muster exactly 319 sorties on DID. Allies flew 14,600. 70-4. PRILLER and his wingman, Unteroffizier, made the only Luftwaffe attack on the beaches that morning. They strafed Sword Beach once in their Focke-Wulf 190s. A single pass, guns blazing. Then they fled, chased by swarms of Allied fighters. 2 planes against an invasion force of thousands. It became a symbol, a bitter joke, a moment of futility that perfectly captured the German position. The Knights of the Air, the ones who were supposed to darken the skies and drive the invaders back, had been reduced to a gesture, a futile, desperate gesture that changed nothing. 0-6:30 hours. The first assault waves hit the beaches. German defenders, those who'd survived the bombardment, those who could still man their guns, opened fire. Heinrich Severloh steadied himself behind the MG-42. His hands found the grips. His finger rested on the trigger. Through the gun sight, he could see them coming. Landing craft, dozens of them, ramps dropping, men pouring out into the surf. He squeezed out the gun, roared to life. 1,200 rounds per minute. The noise was a continuous scream. Spent brass casings fountained from the ejection port. The gun bucked against his shoulder. He kept firing. Men fell. The water turned red. Bodies floated. Landing craft exploded. Severloh fired and fired and fired until his vision blurred and his hands cramped and the barrel began to glow. For 9 hours. He would maintain fire from that position. 13,500 rounds. He would later claim, desperate to understand what he'd witnessed, desperate to believe his sacrifice meant something, that he'd killed 1,000 men, maybe 2,000. Historians would study his position, run the calculations, determine that while his contribution to the carnage at Omaha Beach was significant, the numbers he claimed were impossible. The total American death toll from all causes was around 2,400, but in that moment, Severloh wasn't thinking about statistics. He was just firing, reloading, firing again, watching men die, and more men appear, and more men die, and more men appear. Endless. By midday, something was breaking in the German defenders. Military historians would later term it material shock, the psychological collapse that occurs when soldiers confront overwhelming, incomprehensible force. No matter how many Allied soldiers fell, more appeared. Every destroyed landing craft was replaced by 3 more. Every silenced machine gun position was answered by naval gunfire that seemed limitless. Every small tactical victory was drowned under the sheer weight of Allied material. German positions began reporting critical ammunition shortages. The defensive plans had calculated expenditure based on repelling a limited assault, maybe a division, maybe 2. They'd stocked ammunition accordingly. Nobody had planned for this. Artillery batteries, the backbone of the defense, started rationing shells for per gun per day by afternoon. Meanwhile, American destroyers fired hundreds of shells at single targets, casually, wastefully, as if ammunition cost nothing. The contrast was crushing. Attempts to bring forward reserve stocks failed. Every road was under constant Allied fighter-bomber attack. Every vehicle that moved during daylight was destroyed within minutes. The German defenders were learning a terrible lesson. Modern war wasn't about courage or training or tactical brilliance. It was about production, and the Allies had production capacity that defied comprehension. The 21st Panzer Division, the only German armored unit close to the beaches, the force Rommel had insisted must defeat any invasion on the beaches themselves, remained paralyzed through the critical morning hours. No orders came. The division commander waited. His tank crews waited, engines idling, fuel burning, time bleeding away. The attack order finally arrived at 1000 hours. 4 hours after the landings began, the 21st Panzer finally moved at 16:20 hours. Late afternoon, they advanced between British airborne landing zones toward the coast. According to divisional records, they actually reached ashore between Lyon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer around 1900 hours, the only German armored unit to reach the coast on day. For a moment, a brief, shining moment, it seemed like they might actually accomplish something. Then they saw Operation Mallard. 250 gliders, streaming in from the sea, massive, unstoppable, bringing reinforcements to the British 6th Airborne Division. The German tank commanders stared at the aerial armada and made a decision. They withdrew. Tanks and armored vehicles were lost that day. 25% of the division's strength gone, and they hadn't even engaged the main Allied force. Throughout D-Day, German units faced another nightmare. Airborne forces operating behind their lines. The British 6th Airborne, the American 82nd, the American 101st. Entire divisions dropped from the sky, creating chaos, cutting roads, holding bridges, appearing everywhere and nowhere. General Major Friedrich von der Heydt, Germany's most experienced paratrooper commander, serving with the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, was in Normandy during the invasion. His professional assessment, recorded in post-war interviews, was damning. The Allied airborne operation was everything ours had never been. Massive, coordinated, supplied. We dropped battalions. They dropped divisions. We were supplied by single aircraft. They had endless streams of gliders and transport planes. The psychological impact multiplied German problems exponentially. Units refused to move, fearing ambush. Others fired at shadows, sometimes at their own men. Entire battalions vanished into confusion. Division commanders lost contact with regiments. Regiment commanders lost contact with battalions. The command structure didn't just crack, it disintegrated. As D-Day progressed, German command and control collapsed completely. Allied aircraft systematically destroyed communication lines. French resistance activated by coded BBC messages, cut telephone cables, and destroyed relay stations. Radio communications were jammed. Generalleutnant Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of 7th Army, attempted to coordinate the defense from headquarters at Le Mans. His war diary records increasing desperation as contact with forward units disappeared. By noon, entire divisions had vanished from the communication network. Individual commanders made decisions in isolation. Without orders, without information, without any idea what was happening 2 miles away, darkness finally fell on June 6. Surviving German defenders took stock. The impregnable Atlantic Wall had been breached in multiple places. The Luftwaffe had essentially ceased to exist over Normandy. The Kriegsmarine had managed to sink 1 destroyer, USS Corrie, while losing 15 E-boats and numerous smaller craft. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Division, which had borne the brunt of the British assault, sent a report to 7th Army headquarters. The words were simple: devastating. Division combat strength, 35%. All coastal strongpoints lost. Artillery, 90% destroyed. Enemy advancing inland. In a single day, the German forces had suffered casualties equivalent to a major battle, and the Allies were still landing troops. Fresh ones, thousands of them, as if D-Day was merely the beginning, not the climax, the beginning. Throughout the night of June 6th to 7th, German units attempted to regroup and counterattack. These efforts revealed the full extent of Allied technological supremacy. Hans von Luck's Panzer Grenadiers, finally released to attack, advanced toward Sword Beach in darkness. According to his memoir, they were immediately illuminated by parachute flares. It was like daylight, he wrote. Every vehicle, every soldier, visible the shells came from the sea with perfect accuracy. We lost half our strength without seeing a single enemy soldier. Meanwhile, Allied reinforcements continued landing. The artificial Mulberry harbors were already being assembled. Supply ships anchored in organized rows. The invasion wasn't just succeeding, it was transforming into a permanent presence. As German reinforcements attempted to reach Normandy, they encountered complete interdiction. Every road, every railway, every bridge, under constant attack. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse, received orders to move north. The journey should have taken 3 days. It took 17. They arrived having lost 30% of their vehicles to air attack, without firing a shot at ground forces. If they couldn't even reach the battlefield intact, how could they hope to influence it? Allied logistics, meanwhile, operated with stunning efficiency. LST's landing ship tank discharged entire armored regiments in hours. Within days, the Allies were landing 15,000 tons of supplies daily, more than the entire German army in Normandy, consumed in a week. By June 12, German forces were approaching psychological collapse. 26,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. Roughly 2 full divisions. Replacements, minimal. Allied strength grew hourly. Carrington fell on June 12, linking Utah and Omaha beaches. German paratroopers, elite troops who had never previously retreated, withdrew in disorder. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heydt, reported, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." June 13th brought one of the few German tactical victories. SSO Michael Wittmann, one of the war's greatest tank aces, destroyed 13 to 14 British tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 to 15 personnel carriers at Villiers-Bocage. In 15 minutes, German propaganda seized on the victory. Proof, they claimed, that German arms could still prevail. But even this brilliance revealed the futility. Wittmann's Tiger tank disabled. In the battle was replaced by the Germans with difficulty. British losses were replaced within hours. Wittmann himself, with 138 confirmed tank kills, was killed on August 8 when his Tiger was destroyed. Whether by British gunner Joe Eakins or Canadian forces remains disputed. The greatest tank ace had been eliminated by an enemy that could afford to trade 10 tanks for 1. Tiger, the fall of Cherbourg, on June 26, provided another psychological blow. This Major port, fortified over 4 years, garrisoned by 21,000 men, was supposed to hold for months. Fell in 5 days of serious fighting. General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieffen, commanding the garrison, had proclaimed he would defend Cherbourg to the last bullet. Instead, he surrendered on June 20-6. In post-war interrogation, he explained, resistance became meaningless against unlimited enemy resources, a theme that would echo throughout German accounts of Normandy. Operation Cobra, beginning July 25, delivered the knockout punch. The preparatory bombardment involved 1,530 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, 550 fighter bombers. They dropped over 4,100 tons of bombs in a concentrated area just 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Division, reported, "My division is annihilated. The psychological effect on survivors is indescribable. They are no longer soldiers. They are broken men." The bombing was so intense it killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater, who was observing from what was thought to be a safe distance. If American generals weren't safe from their own firepower, what chance did German soldiers have? The Falaise Pocket, August 12 to 21st, became the graveyard of German forces in Normandy. 10,000 Germans died. 50,000 were captured. Over 300 tanks destroyed. 2,500 other vehicles. German soldiers, attempting to escape, described apocalyptic scenes. Roads carpeted with dead horses and burning vehicles. Allied fighter bombers attacking in waves every 20 minutes. Artillery falling continuously. Many simply gave up, preferring captivity to certain death. The final accounting tells the story. German losses. June 6 to August 31st. 320,000 casualties. 30,000 killed. 80,000 wounded. 210,000 missing or captured. 2,300 tanks destroyed. Virtually all German armor in France. 2,127 aircraft lost. Allied losses. 29,672 casualties. With replacements exceeding losses daily, approximately 4,000 tanks lost. Replaced within weeks. 4,111 aircraft lost. From a force exceeding 13,000. The disparity revealed fundamental truth. Germany was fighting an attrition battle it could not win. Against an enemy with virtually unlimited reserves, professional German military officers provided the most objective assessments. General der Panzertruppen, Heinrich Severloh, who assumed command in Normandy after Rommel was wounded, reported to OKW on August 1st. The enemy's material superiority is at least 20-1 in artillery, 10-1 in tanks, absolute. In aircraft, he can replace all losses within days. We cannot replace anything. General Hans Speitel Rommel's chief of staff wrote in his 1949 memoir, Normandy proved that courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy. We faced an enemy who had mechanized not just warfare, but victory itself. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel left the most powerful testament. In his final report to Hitler, July 15, 2 days before being severely wounded by Allied aircraft, he wrote, "The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. The enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and material is beginning to tell. I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay." Military language for complete defeat. Rommel, Germany's most celebrated commander, was telling Hitler the war was lost. The Normandy campaign revealed that World War II had become a production war. German soldiers witnessed American industrial capacity that defied comprehension. Ford's Willow Run plant alone produced one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. American factories manufactured 96,000 aircraft in 1,944. Allied ammunition expenditure in one day exceeded German production. In a month, a single American division consumed more supplies daily than an entire German corps. Hans von Luck, reflecting in his memoir, wrote, "We learned that modern war was not about tactics or courage. It was about production. The Americans had turned war into an industrial process. They manufactured victory on assembly lines." The German soldiers who survived Normandy were psychologically transformed. They had witnessed the complete invalidation of everything they'd been taught about warfare, about racial superiority, about national destiny. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner of WN-62, spent the rest of his life haunted by his D-Day experience. In his 2005 memoir, he wrote about meeting American D-Day veterans. "We all realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 rounds meant nothing against their unlimited replacements." Friedrich von der Hattade, the paratrooper commander, who became a professor of international law after the war, wrote, "Normandy taught us that the era of warrior heroes was over. War had become a matter of industrial capacity, and we had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with horses and outdated dreams." D-Day, from the German perspective, was not merely military defeat, that it was complete ideological and psychological collapse. Soldiers who had conquered most of Europe, discovered that everything they believed about their enemies, their cause, their capabilities was catastrophically wrong. They had expected weak, divided democracies. Instead, they encountered an alliance that had transformed war into an industrial process of overwhelming efficiency. They witnessed democracy's arsenal in action: unlimited ships, planes, tanks, supplies flowing from factories, whose capacity exceeded German comprehension. The German defenders of Normandy learned that modern war was won not on battlefields, but in factories, not by the bravest soldiers, but by the most productive societies. They discovered that the Western Allies had revolutionized warfare, turning it into a mathematical equation where production statistics mattered more than tactical brilliance. Heinrich Severloh began June 6, believing the invasion would be thrown back within hours. He ended it surrounded by thousands of empty shell casings, watching endless waves of Allied reinforcements land on the beach his position was supposed to control. His experience embodied the larger German tragedy in Normandy. Tactical success drowned in strategic impossibility. The beaches of Normandy. It became not just a battlefield, but a revelation. German soldiers witnessed the future of warfare, and it belonged to the societies that could produce the most material and apply it most efficiently. They had brought courage, training, determination. The Allies brought unlimited industrial production. In trying to hold back the Allied invasion, the German defenders might as well have been trying to hold back the tide itself. They fired until their barrels melted, fought until their ammunition ran out, watched as the Allies simply brought more of everything. The mathematics of modern war had rendered their courage irrelevant. The German soldiers who faced D-Day learned history's hardest lesson. In the age of industrial warfare, nations that cannot match their enemy's production are doomed, regardless of their soldiers' skill or sacrifice. They began June 6 as warriors of the Third Reich. They ended it as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in its full, terrifying efficiency. Their defeat was not just military, it was total. A crushing demonstration that the Nazi vision of racial superiority and military dominance had collided with the reality of Allied industrial supremacy, and shattered completely the invasion they had promised to throw back into the sea had instead swept them away, carrying with it the last illusions of German victory. The concrete was cold, but the sea was endless, and it would not stop coming.